David Ruffin, he could sing like a hurricane, and at the same time, he had a sense of knowing how to connect to the people, and all he needed was a stage. Now, if you made it this far, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, without further ado, let's cue that intro. Born Davis Eli Ruffin on January 18, 1941 in Wynot, Mississippi. He's the third born child to Ophelia and Elias Ruffin, who was a minister. Now Davis, he had 3 siblings, Jimmy, Quincy, and Rita. He also had another sister, but she passed away when she was an infant. Ophelia, she would pass away in 1941 when Davis was only 10 months old. Now Mr. Ruffin, he would get remarried in 1942 to a school teacher, Erlene. Now Davis, his father, he was very strict and abusive at times. As kids, his siblings and himself would travel with their father and stepmother as a family gospel group. They would open up for the acts of Mahalia Jackson and the 5 Blind Boys of Mississippi, to name a few. Davis, he began falling in love with singing, and he would sing anywhere he could, such as the church choir, talent shows, anywhere. Now the singers in the family was Jimmy and Davis, and this was during the 40s and 50s in the South, during Jim Crow. Now, there wasn't many paths to wealth or fame for black people, so if you made it or even had black and white dance to your music, you were special. And Jimmy and Davis, they was the special ones. In 1955, at the age of 14, he would leave the home under the guardianship with minister Eddie Bush. They would move to Memphis with the purpose of Davis becoming a minister. Davis, he would go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where he met jazz musician Phineas Newborn Sr. Now the duo, they would play together at the 50 Grand Ballroom and Casino. During this time, Davis, he would now go by the name Little David Bush. While in Arkansas, Lil David, he participated in talent shows. He even worked with horses at a jockey club. David began gaining some attention, and he would become a member of the Dixie Nightingales. He would also sing with the Soul Stirrers for a brief moment after Johnny Taylor left. David, he traveled a lot, and he saw so many up-and-coming musicians who would eventually become icons later on in life, like Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Frankie Lyman, and Bobby Womack, to name a few. Now David, he looked up to Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson, and when they left gospel music and went to secular music, David, he decided to do the same. Eddie Bush and his wife Dorothy would then take a 16-year-old David to Detroit, where his older brother Jimmy was already pursuing a music career. This move to Detroit would motivate Lil David. In 1957, he would meet a songwriter who then had strong ambitions to own his own record company. This guy was none other than Berry Gordy Jr. During this time, Lil David, he would live with Berry Gordy Sr. and help Mr. Gordy do construction to a building that would eventually become Hitsville, USA. In 1958, Lil David Bush, he would record 2 singles titled You and I and Believe Me. Jimmy, he would find his way to a record deal with Tama Records. Lil David, he was already so close with the Gordy family, so he would work with Berry Gordy's sister Gwen as an apprentice for Anna Records. Now Anna Records was a Chess Records sub-label that was ran by Gwen Gordy and Billy Davis. In 1988, Gwen, she was asked about David, and she said David always showed manners, saying yes ma'am and no ma'am. She also said he was the first artist that she saw that would rehearse as if he was on stage performing. In the late 50s, Lil David, he would create music as a vocalist and drummer for the popular local group, the Voice Masters. David, he would record the songs I'm in Love and One of These Days. Now Lil David Bush, he would go by the name David Ruffin, and he would also gain a solo deal with Anna Records, but it was unsuccessful. Now with Ruffin's prior relationship with Blue, he was always around the Temptations, and he always expressed how he wanted to become a member. Jimmy, he would go on the Motown review tour, and when he came back, the Temptations, they were looking for a member since Al, he was fired in December of 1963. At a New Year's Eve party in 1963 going into 1964, the Temptations, they were performing. Now at this time, Jimmy, he was an honest replacement for Al, so he was performing with the group. Now Jimmy, being an older brother, knowing how much David wanted to be part of this group, he would take a step back and let his brother take the shine. And when I say David stole the show, he stole the damn show. So much that David, he would become the new member of the Temptations instead of Jimmy. January 9th, 1964 had became Ruffin's first recording session with the group. This recording session became the song The Way You Do the Things You Do. Now David, he started off doing background vocals, while the lead switched between Paul and Eddie. Now Smokey Robinson, he wrote and produced all of the group's early material, and he always saw something in David. He described David's voice as something that was unique, like something mellow but gruff. Robinson believed that if he could write the perfect song for David, it would be an automatic hit. He would write a song that he was inspired by his wife, but he would write the song in a way that David can belt about, but also be melodic and sweet. December 21st, 1964, My Girl was released, and this song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts, also going number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts. This song will also reach number 43 on the UK charts. Now this song had put the group on the map. From years of producing songs that wouldn't connect to the people and overcoming the terrible name of the no-hit Temps, to becoming the number 1 Temps. This would become the group's signature song, and also it would become the moment where David went from being in the background to becoming the group front man. David's first full album with the group was The Temptations Sing Smokey. This album reached number 35 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 1 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts. On this album was 2 hits that David sung as lead, with It's Growing, that reached number 18 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 3 on the Billboard R&B charts, along with My Girl. November 1st, 1965, the group, they would release a third album titled The Tempting Temptations. This album reached number 11 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 1 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts. Now David, he would sing 2 songs on this album, which was My Baby, that reached number 13 on Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 4 on the Billboard R&B charts, and Since I Lost My Baby, that reached number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 4 on the Billboard R&B charts. January 15th, 1966, the group, they would drop their 4th album titled Getting Ready. This album reached number 12 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 1 on the Billboard Top R&B charts. Now David, he had 1 hit single on this album with the song Ain't Too Proud to Beg. This song would reach number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts. Now, August 4th, 1966, the group, they would release a single titled Beauty Is Only Skin Deep that reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts, number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts, also going 18 on the UK charts. In 1966, David, he began dating fellow label mate Tammy Terrell. Things started off nice, but it began to get rocky soon. With David being abusive towards Tammy, also David gained a drug problem sometime in the early 1960s that played a huge part in their relationship. David, he would end up proposing to Tammy, but she would soon find out that he was already married. In 1967, the two had an altercation that would end with David hitting Tammy in the head with a motorcycle helmet. After this incident, the two, they would split. In 1967, David, he would try to get help for his drug problem. On June 17, 1967, the group, they would drop another album titled The Temptations with a Whole Lot of Soul. This album had reached number 7 on the Billboard 200 charts, and David, he would go on to sing lead on 2 hit singles titled I Know I'm Losing You that reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts, also going 19 on the UK charts. It's You That I Need that reached number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 3 on the R&B charts. Now, 1967, it was a bad year for the group emotionally. David, his drug problem began to get worse, and he began to miss rehearsals, even showing up late to performances. He would even refuse to travel in the same limo with the group. That same year, the Supremes, they would change their name to focus more on Diana Ross. And David, he wanted to do the same. He wanted to name the group David Ruffin and the Temptations. This action will blow the group, and this will leave David on thin ice. April 29th, 1968, the group, they will release another album titled The Temptations, Wish It Would Rain. This album was the last album from the Class of 5 era, also becoming the last album that Smokey Robinson would produce. David, he was seen lead on 2 hit singles from the album with I Could Never Love Another that reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts, along with the self-titled Name that reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts. David has always been a very passionate person, especially when it comes to his music. The group trademark four-headed mic was created so David could have room to put on a show. I mean, the man was 6'3". The group, they had a very important performance. Dean Martin's daughter, Barbara Gale Martin, she was in attendance, and David, he would go on to miss his performance, and on June 27th, 1968, David, he was fired from the group and replaced by Dennis Edwards, former member of the Contours. In October of 1968, David, he would file a lawsuit against Motown. He wanted to be released from his contract and have an accountant to oversee his assets. Motown, they would countersue David, keeping him to Motown, but as a solo artist. So David, he would get to work right away, and he would partner up with Harvey Fuqua and Johnny Bristol to produce his solo album. On May 1st, 1968, David's solo album was released titled My Whole World Ended. This album would reach number 31 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 1 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts. This album produced 2 hit singles with I Lost Everything that reached number 58 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 11 on the Billboard R&B charts, along with the self-titled song that reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 2 on the Billboard R&B charts. For his second album, David, he would have Berry Gordy Jr., Ashford Simpson, and Johnny Bristol to produce his album. November 1969, his second album released titled Feeling Good. This album reached number 148 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 9 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts. This album produced 1 hit single with I'm So Glad I Fell For You. Now this song reached number 53 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 18 on the Billboard R&B charts. Between January 6, 1969 and May 26, 1971, David's third album was set to release, but for some reason, it was shelved until June 25, 2004. On this album, David, he had teamed up with a young Rick James. By this time, he was going by the name Ricky Matthews. They were partnered up on a song Out in the Country. In 1970, David, he would pair up with his older brother Jimmy to record the album I Am My Brother's Keeper. This album was released in October 1970, and this album reached 178 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 15 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts. February of 1973, his self-titled album was released, and this album reached 160 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 34 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts. This album produced 1 hit single titled Common Man that reached number 84 on the Billboard R&B charts. Now, David's solo career had a lot of promise, but it went downhill, reportedly because of his cocaine addiction, plus the lack of support from the label. Now, Motown, they was going to release David, but they decided to give him another chance. December of 1974, David, he will release another album titled Me and Rock and Roll Are Here to Stay. This album reached number 37 on the Billboard R&B charts. For this album, David, he had paired up with an A-lister producer known as Norman Whitfield. October 1st, 1975, David he would release another album titled Who I Am. This album reached number 31 on the Billboard 200 charts and number 5 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts. This album produced 2 hit singles with Heavy Love that reached number 47 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 8 on the Billboard R&B charts. Also, Walk Away From Love that reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts. This song will also become David's biggest solo hit of his career. And also with this album, David he would pair up with legendary producer Van McCoy. David he would go on to release 2 more albums with Motown before leaving in 1977, where he would ultimately sign with Warner Brothers Records. At Warner Brothers, David he would release 2 albums titled So Soon We Change and Gentleman Ruffin. In 1981, David he would go on to sign to RCA Records, where a close friend would also sign to the same label, Eddie Kendricks. The two they would rekindle their friendship after Eddie expressed troubles that he was having with the group. In 1982, Motown they was planning on having a reunion with the Temptations members, and they also had a tour lined up. Now, the tour it was short-lived due to David missing shows as a result of his drug habit taking over. The group they was fined thousands of dollars due to his absence. So after the tour, David and Eddie they was dismissed and the two began working together as a duo. In 1988, the two they would release an album together titled Ruffin and Kendrick. This album reached number 60 on the Billboard Top R&B Album charts, and this album would go on to produce 2 singles with I Couldn't Believe It that reached number 14 on the Billboard R&B charts, and one more for the Lonely Hearts Club that reached number 43 on the Billboard R&B charts. In 1989, the Temptations they was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, after the Hall of Fame, Ruffin, Edwards, and Kendrick they began touring together as the former leads of the Temptations. In 1991, the trio they completed a successful month-long tour in England that grossed $300,000. It was planned for the trio to do a full-fledged tour in Europe, but June 1st, 1991, David he would pass away from a drug overdose. Now, at the time of David's death, he was living in Philadelphia with his girlfriend since 1989. Now, David he has been married twice with a total of 4 kids. Now, David has so many people that admired him. Martha Reeves would say that nobody could sing like David Ruffin. Even Marvin Gaye, he would say that David's work had made him realize why so many women wanted to listen to his music. David, he will be inducted into the Mississippi Musician Hall of Fame. And David, he is still relevant to this day. His name is still being dropped in songs that comes out. Even rapper Wiz Khalifa had made his mixtape cover an exact replica of David's album. Now, David Ruffin is a very important member of the group. He took an unknown group and turned them into icons. If it wasn't for him joining the group, Smokey Robinson would have never got inspired to write My Girl for David, which in reality became a turning point for all parties involved.